Hi, I'm Mikael. I'm a starseed, and I've been struggling with the situation in the Holy Land. There are so many people suffering, and I've seen a higher vision, a vision of peace. So, what bothers me is that there's a lot of messaging that normalizes war. If the actions of the state of Israel are questioned, a lot of people might answer Israel has the right to defend itself. Now, I think it's really important to look at how far that narrative goes in terms of civilian impact. Surely it's not a blank check. And the reason I think that is so important is because of the power of narrative. Narratives and belief systems shape our reality. So, in other words, it's not only got an impact on how we see countries that might be far away, but also for self on a personal and collective level. So, just to give you a rough idea of how far that narrative goes at the moment, on August 7th, 2025, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu told Fox News that Israel intends to take control of all of Gaza. And he was talking in terms of liberating Gaza. Now, in a way, this is odd because you might be aware that we're not so sure people want to be liberated by him. I want to look at this situation in two parts. First, an ethical human rights perspective, and second, a starseed spiritual perspective. Sometimes these two perspectives might blend into each other, but I'm going to do my utmost best to discern between them and to separate facts from opinions. So let me start by saying that I condemn all mass killing and mistreatment of civilians in armed conflicts. Israel's response to those terrible attacks on October 7th, 2023 has greatly increased the scale in violence, according to independent research reported recently in the news section of the Nature Scientific Journal. Almost 84,000 people died up to January 5th, 2025 in Gaza. More than half were women, children, or older adults. I'd like to give you an example of how a narrative of defending yourself can evolve. Recently, an audio recording leaked from a former intelligence chief from the Israeli Defense Forces.
העובדה שיש בה 50,000 הרוגים בעזה היא הכרחית ונדרשת לדורות הבאים. אוקיי, השחטתם. אוקיי, השפלתם. אוקיי, שחטתם, רצחתם, הכל מחר. המחיר, אני אמרתי שלנו, על כל מה שקרה בשבוע, על כל אחד בשבוע באוקטובר צריך לעמוד 50 פלסטינים. זה לא משנה עכשיו ילדים. אני לא מדבר על זה מתוך נקמה, אני מדבר על זה מתוך מסר לדורות הבאים. אין לעשות, הם צריכים את פעם נקפה כדי להגיש כדי לכם. אין ברירה בעיה בשכונה המופרעת הזאת.
So this kind of thinking makes me feel really sick. But I also want to understand it. I want to analyze it and see what I can learn from it. One way to understand this is to look for movements with similar ideas, without saying, of course, that this is exactly the same. One of those is the neoconservative movement in the US. In particular, the Ledeen doctrine didn't seem too considerate for civilian lives either. This way of thinking was echoed in the Wolfowitz doctrine, modeled by the Rand Institute and amplified by the Project for the New American Century. They talked about frequent, proactive use of force and periodic interventions to assert dominance. It's a different time with different actors, but the way of thinking is the same. Let's look in detail at US policies to understand how this works out in practice. In 1945, the US ended World War II with 2 nuclear bombs. Japan, which was allied with Nazi Germany, paid the price with 210,000 civilian deaths. This has been framed as a justification by traditional historians, but to me it's highly questionable. From the Vietnam War to wars in the Middle East, the US has often followed similar practices. For example, the Shock and Awe campaign in Baghdad in 2003 took over 6,000 civilian lives. The total death toll of the Iraq War is estimated anywhere between 100,000 and over 1 million. A majority of Americans now agree that the invasion of Iraq was a failure, or at least questionable. Personally, I think the decision from Bush to start the Iraq War was no better than the decision from Putin to start the Ukraine war. The reason is the level of deception, where those lower in command think that they are fighting for a just cause. The previous quote, known as the Ledeen Doctrine, was popularized by Jonah Goldberg, a self-described admirer. He justified the Iraq War because total victory worked with Japan too, and he invoked the Ledeen Doctrine as a tongue-in-cheek rationale. Interestingly, he also saw Iraq as a central threat to Israel, and war as a road to peace and prosperity. But it hasn't worked for Iraq. I think of it as an ethics compass that is way off. We see great civilian harm when an overwhelming violence strategy is chosen. This is usually already decided in the beginning of a conflict. We can see the same kind of decision-making in the beginning of the Gaza war. One reason is the embedded, tunneled and high-volume rockets tactics of Hamas. From military logic, an invasion with less force would cost more Israeli soldiers' lives. As a result, human rights are deprioritized for a so-called higher purpose. I believe that the failure in Iraq was only a shallow reflection for most Americans. In other words, many didn't reflect deeply. It didn't stop them from giving Netanyahu unconditional support, a blank check without human rights conditions. If you've seen some of the news, you've also seen that there's a lot of destruction of civilian infrastructure, and this has also been backed up by studies from the UN and the World Bank. I don't feel it's my role to try and convince you of taking any particular side. This video is not about sides, it's about narratives and the effects of those narratives in terms of real human suffering. So I'd like to go back to who's shaping the narrative. Israeli government officials only announce investigations in very select cases. And usually this depends on international attention. There's a lot of evidence for this. For example, from the Action on Armed Violence, Israel often states that operations comply with international humanitarian law and civilian harm is unintended. When allegations arise, the army cites internal mechanisms, and Israel rejects using starvation as a method of warfare. But is the narrative credible? It really depends on who you ask and what sources they find credible. According to Israel, organizations are biased against them. In fact, Israel invests millions to influence international public opinion. It's over $150 million in 2025, which has been reported. And this is called Hasbara. As former Israeli official Meron Metzini explains in Reflections on Israel's public diplomacy, Hasbara is a Hebrew term that can be translated as explaining and disseminating information in addition to being propaganda. The last term became intolerable due to its use by the Nazis. Now let's establish that there are two competing and opposite narratives here. One is of independent research that Israel says is biased, and it concludes human rights violations, and there are accusations of genocide. And on this side are the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, Yesh Din, and the Action on Armed Violence. On the other hand, Israel says that they have great faith in their internal review mechanisms and they comply with international humanitarian law. And part of this narrative are the government, prime minister, the defense forces, the UN ambassador, and Israel advocates. Now, can both of these narratives be true? I don't think so, because there would be a convergence in accountability and communication, and I haven't really seen that. Now, I'll tell you why these narratives don't come together. If the independent research narrative is true, Israel's identity as a moral and civil country is just in tatters. It doesn't have the most moral army in the world, as it likes to say. But if narrative 2 would be true, then all of these independent organizations are biased against Israel. Actually, to even take narrative 2 seriously, you'd have to have an extremely high confidence in internal review mechanisms and no confidence in international independent organizations. Now, you could look at these claims as objective and testable, but I don't think people always base their decision on that. Psychologically, it actually depends on identity, which evidence looks credible to you. So those identity-based decisions could be influenced by the idea of a benevolent in-group versus a dangerous outside world. It could be influenced by religious claims to land versus equal rights. This also raises an important question. If you had to choose between your identity and human rights, what would you choose? I think it's an important question, wherever you stand. And you might say, I'm just neutral, and I've been a long-time advocate of inner neutrality myself. But I think that inner neutrality doesn't always mean equal attention or equal blame. It's more of a way to recognize relational patterns and to stay clear of emotional manipulation. So the question of if you have to choose your identity or human rights, I think it's an important question wherever you stand. And it's also a realistic question for many people, especially against the global backdrop of rising authoritarianism. This can overshadow democratic and humanitarian values. Extremist groups also seem to feel emboldened by that movement. Fascism can encroach society to a degree of silent approval, meaning that even just staying silent can be interpreted as approval. There is already a bridge from everyday relativism to fascism, when it's no longer grounded in reason, but twisted to fit an opportunistic agenda. As historian Timothy Snyder puts it in On Tyranny, post-truth is pre-fascism. Abandoning shared facts clears a path for authoritarian politics. The more abstraction and dehumanization, the easier it is to relativize human rights away. That is why it matters which narratives we accept. Right now, US tech companies invest in Israel's military industry because Israel's narrative is acceptable to them and to their investors. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese lists these and other companies. That's the evidence, as I understand it. And I'd like to share how I make sense of it spiritually. As a starseed, I believe in human rights for all citizens of the universe. Starseeds have a spiritual lens centered on multidimensional consciousness and human rights. I feel connected beyond nations and borders, but I'm also pragmatic. I support any reasonable solution, as long as human rights are respected for everyone. It's really important that all people involved have an equal voice. I also believe in rejecting ideas that fail to treat people equally, for civil rights, for land rights, for human rights. In my opinion, these kind of ideas open doors for stealing another's land or shelter or even their dignity. These kind of desires are rooted in domination and ego. As such, they violate human rights, which to me are fundamental. By fundamental, I mean that these are primary values that we need to strive for, such as safety and freedom of expression. The starseed meaning for fundamental is something innate that we uncover as we evolve. In my starseed visions, this principle is encoded in the blueprint in our DNA and in our blood. We are built for peace, not violence. This guides me to the importance of equal human rights for each community and each person. In my meditations, each bloodline carries a facet of this blueprint. This means that no bloodline has moral superiority over another. Human rights are equal for all. That includes equal protection under law and equal rights for safety and expression. I believe that each of us can access this blueprint by letting go of polarization and embracing neutrality. But what does this mean practically? Resist ego-driven clickbait. Instead, go for independent facts and careful consideration. This protects the space for credible accounts and independent voices. I am very grateful for the many starseed visions that I've received. They were visions of a new earth of peace. Collective inner peace quells the need to violate anyone's human rights, whether it's in Gaza, the West Bank, or anywhere in the world. The result gradually ends violations of human rights and establishes a better society. The facts on the ground need factual verification, but my visions guide my values. They don't depend on winning a fight, because they just are. What I find more helpful than fighting, anyway, it's discernment. Developing discernment makes it easier to spot propaganda. and to see through it. Additionally, you can quickly separate the wheat from the chaff in any message. Whether it's an inner belief or media propaganda, it can't hook into your emotions anymore. You come back to clarity, anchored in universal human rights. I use discernment to align myself with a higher truth, to clearly see what is and isn't in alignment, and to gently move towards that which is more in alignment. Sometimes our discernment can get clouded through propaganda. In practical terms, a slogan shouldn't outrun evidence. Are the slogans appropriate for the situation, or are they designed to manipulate public opinion? The starseed lens helps to see through manipulation. This creates space for discernment. Discernment, in turn, helps to align with a greater truth, not through battle, but through awareness. So when looking at all of this, is war being normalized? Are human rights violations being normalized? Or is everything happening according to humanitarian law? And are all these research projects just biased against Israel? Is Israel trying to sell a war? Or is it just defending itself? Let me know in the comments what you think.